Now, picking up from the last video, which you saw was explaining part 16 of the first story I ever wrote in the community tab about rural Broken Bow and the surrounding areas. Now, what you see is the mix of American partisans, which are a combo of uh, ex military formations after the defeat of the United States by China and its allies, like Russia and so on and so forth. And some of them brought their equipment with them, like here you have a M2 Browning 50 cal machine gun, and there's also captured Chi-Com and Russian weapons like PKM machine guns, which are 7.62 by 54 millimeter. Um, Not 39, but 7.62 by 54, and also the Chi-Com variant of that, which they produce, which is the Type 80. And the Type 86 is what's mounted on some armored vehicles as like a turret weapon. But they have captured Chi-Com weapons and a whole assortment of small arms, because it's a lot of privately owned small arms that they had prior to the invasion, mixed with some captured small arms. And I showed you how they use different things in this, such as the Chi-Coms using RPGs and grenades, and how the Americans used grenades that they captured from the Chi-Coms to get into the hatch of this vehicle and eliminate it from these foxholes and primitive trench systems they dug, and also Molotovs, and how the PLA squads broke into star formation and, two columns and wedge formations upon exiting their APCs and IFVs in this recon and force operation, which is essentially what led up to what you saw later with Operation Skull Bash, which was the occupation forces operation, the first major one in the entire surrounding area around Broken Bow, conducted by the local occupation forces in the area to drive out the partisan elements and destroy them if possible, which they weren't ever actually able to completely destroy them, but they dealt them major, major blows. And what you seen developing was classic counter-insurge types of conflicts among the occupation forces against the partisans, or the guerrillas of the Americans. Um, and it bogged down into a long war of occupation and insurge, I'll just call it. And you see how the initial area that had been built up over the last month before they were discovered, it was well protected by coniferous trees like pines and all sorts of shrubs and other layers overhead of forest, and plus the earth itself that they dug under. This shielded them from complete discovery by recon drones with IR sensors, and also spy planes, satellites, you name it, things like that, shielded them from immediate discovery until Chi-Com recon forces of the Cav Scout Company that belonged to the recon battalion of the 127th Light Mech Infantry Division came up and found them, and actually stumbled upon them when traversing 259 and 259A here, and actually stumbled upon the cabins where they were keeping supplies, and also medical facilities and other such logistical areas, in addition to their trench systems that were stumbled upon when they pursued some of the first Americans they caught out and about upon patrolling these areas. Now, the information gathered from this skirmish, upon taking it back to the FOB, which was at the Broken Bow Municipal Airport, which was the local FOB under control of the occupation forces, which I made a map of the Broken Bow area. Now, this map takes place after Operation Skull Bash began, from about Part 53 onward, but the operation began around Part 52, when this area right here, which used to be the partisans' main area, where these cabins and such were they were driven out of them, and a wedge was driven up and to capture 259 and use it as a major transit way for logistics and supplies. It was a main service route, as was Route 70 down here between Eagletown and Broken Bow and onward. But you see these elements, these Chi-Com and this Nicaraguan infantry element here. We're about to drive up into the valley and clear it of all partisan forces, which are these rectangles, these green rectangles. And these tents right here are the semi-nomadic pre-prepared areas. Now, they weren't total nomads, but they were semi-nomadic by this point because they were forced to prepare several, well, actually multiple areas that could be used by their people, where they could rotate in between for more safety. As you could see, there were other partisans coming up from Texas about that time, like the story mentions the man named Brian and his element coming up from Texas to aid the other partisans in this area, mostly because they were being flushed from Texas by other counter-insurge operations going on down there by the occupation forces down there. Well, they were driven up here into the Broken Bow area into yet another one, which was Operation Skull Bash that was going on. And the circles are Chi-Com checkpoints, the little boxes with points on each corner is either a combat outpost or a fire base, like how they turned the former partisan camp that I showed you in the little skirmish. They turned that into a fire base for an artillery unit belonging to, or a battery, I should say, belonging to the 160th Battalion of the 160th Motor Infantry Brigade that came into the area. Now, here's the dam that was captured, and here's the lakes right here. And you have also the Spetsnaz that came after. There was that man Buford and his small element. They came after his home. Now, he had still been in his home up to that point, as it was way out in the middle of the woods. But they had found them and went after them as part of the broader operation in the entire area. And here was where that battle at Eagletown had occurred earlier in the story, which was really the first partisan victory, I guess you could call it, because they freed all the Wee to the Gurs that were in this Laogai, which is a slave labor camp that was for fixing and reconstruction in the town. And they had liberated them and used them to add to their ranks and train them and help them become among them. Now you can see these are Russian and Chinese air assets that were used to totally carpet munition the valley and the hilltops here. And all these yellow boxes are abandoned farms and other buildings. But this is showing you how they went from being relatively stationary in this area until it was overrun by Chi-Com, PLA, and PAP forces. They went from being relatively stationary to being forced into a life of semi-nomadism. Now, full nomadism is when you're constantly on the move from place to place, and you don't settle in any one place or in a rotation between any number of places. You are completely moving nonstop. Now, semi-nomadism is when you move from prepared place to prepared place, and by that I mean there are places that are already, for the most part, set up, and you have to do very little once you move into them, like setting up tents and things like that can easily be taken down and then move as you move on to a new prepared place. But everything else, the infrastructure is already in place. But full nomadism is when you're just moving nonstop and there's no set rotation or schedule. You're just staying on the move steadily. Well, they were forced into a life of semi-nomadism at first, but when that became untenable, then the partisans became full-fledged nomads after the events of the first year of the Broken Bow story had taken place. And I'm just showing you the map, and you can see the semi-nomadic prepared places on the map, the little tent icons, and you can see where they're generally at on the map. But yeah, and you can see all the wooded areas and everything else. This is just to give you an idea of what's being discussed here and why it's so important, because in such a real life situation as a foreign invasion and an occupation, you're going to need to know that you're going to have to do these things. You cannot stay in one spot for too long, because that is how they will annihilate you, more or less. So that is the importance of this story dissection and review, because I think the first story gets that across very clearly. So may Yeshua bless and keep you all always.